Welcome to Still Growing in Grace. I'm Mike Zanker. Join me and other amazing guests as we explore and discover better, hope-filled perspectives on biblical texts and difficult themes. Prepare to expand your understanding of God's love and amazing grace. Growing in Grace Ministries Canada and Hope Fellowship, as well as Eastside Church, invite you to enjoy today's program as we dig deeper into what it means to be still growing in grace. Grace, this is live, and I'm really glad that you're taking time to tune in today. If you're watching live with me today, I'm watching with you, so comment, say hello, tell me where you're watching from. Got a really good two-part series. In fact, the next 5 or 6 are going to be really good. But for today and next week, we're going to deal with the idea or concept of questions and triggers along the journey as we grow in grace. None of us have arrived. We're all still growing in grace. And that's kind of why this program is out there. To not have an arrogance of we have the answers, but rather come, join us. And each of us are on separate journeys and have bumped into certain things along the way that have got us excited, or we've had I'll use the word illumination or revelation of something really true that makes more sense than what we might have or how we might have understood it before. I think you're going to really like these next couple of conversations. So dig in, comment. I'll be watching with you, and then I'll come back at the very end, see what you thought. For now, let's dig into this really, really great conversation. Here we go.
By the way, is that right?
All right. Hello and welcome back to Still Growing Grace. And yes, you have the Three Stooges. That's right. Just the three of us. I'm clearly not Curly. But anyway, so today's going to be a little bit different. The other guys weren't available for a chat. I even had one person make a comment in one of our streams last time, too bad you don't have women on the panel. And I said, we'd love to. We just don't have people that are connected to us that can do it at this time of day. This is not a gender issue. This is not. This is about the natural connections we have with each other. That's what's happening. So there's no patriarchal plan here. I want that to be really clear to people, because there's a lot of fantastic female speakers and voices that we need. And this particular program just organically grew into this, and we're open to have more people come on, but it has to be natural, not forced just because we ought to, right? So anyway, back to the topic. We're wondering, with just the three of us here, and with Fred and I as pastors, we get asked a lot of questions. Richard gets bombarded with tons of questions in private messages and emails, wondering about some deeper answers, because people really are looking for something to help them take one more step because they're stuck. And even as a pastor, I have people come to me and want to do a coffee. They don't want the Sunday morning answer, and sermons can help. There's value to sermons, but a one-to-one interaction can really help soften the desperate plea of the question and to actually clarify the tone of the person asking the question. So I'm hoping we can kind of talk about first of all, what are some of the questions that come to us? What are the triggers that cause people to ask questions, and what are some of the answers that we've kind of given, and give permission to this, because I think how we respond matters. There's a gracious way to respond, and there's a harsh way to respond, a pastoral way to respond, and a bombastic get the answers right response. And I don't know. I see a lot of conflict even in those that are growing into a deeper and wider grace. And some teachers need to learn some tenderness and calmness too. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Have you seen stuff like this? Are you facing it? Am I just confirm or deny or?
No. I think it's taken me a long time to pay more attention to the question, and maybe to focus as much on who's asking than just on the question itself. Being a lawyer and, trying to, where the Lord has me and has me spend most of my time writing, is to give specific answers, or sometimes it's general answers, but to give my best answer on a given topic just to allow people to hang a hat on a hook to give them hope.
Mm.
Just enough not to explain everything. I don't have all the answers. Goodness gracious, who does? But I do think the Lord gives us enough to create hooks for people. Here's where you can hang your hat of hope on this hook. The other day, I posted something about he's the father of lights, not the father of plights. All
Mm.
right. Now, just turning the speech there. But then someone asked a question that was pretty detailed in that. But my first response was, why would somebody ask a question? I mean, from the father, something saying he's not the father of plights. You would think that would be something. Oh yeah, yeah, you're right. He's not the father of evil. He's not the father of plagues. He's not the father of crushings and of smitings and all that. And yet, that seemed to me to be an odd thing to respond to. If I was trying to be more, particular about something, I could understand it. But I could see that the person was struggling, but that this particular question, and then it triggered triggered the person into the Exodus plagues.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
and I could see that. I mean, I could see that. So I was even evolving my own understanding of what was going on. And she asks very good questions, but she was frustrated. And and so anyway, it helped me. And I posted 2 or 3 different answers to her, and then I just felt like the Lord checked me, and I pulled them back. That's not what she's needing to hear. And so I kept going through. I have everything recorded that I've ever written, so I can just put in my notes. I can just put in words. I can remember words from everything I've ever written or phrases, and then it'll pop it up, and then that at least gives me a start. But I had to prayerfully consider, what did she need to hear instead of what do I want to answer. so
Yeah.
uh, so anyway, I think that that's an important thing, because they may need. And I had another situation with you remember when we talked about Origen's accommodation,
Yep. That was well.
theory, and that's basically that God in the Old Testament knew that they thought wrong things about him, but he accommodated their level of understanding. So he didn't say, you're wrong on that, you're wrong on that, you're wrong on that, you're wrong on that. He said he stayed silent while they mischaracterized him, but he did continue to abide with them on the levels where they could receive it. Well, I got a great question the other day and said basically, well, that's okay. In the Old Testament, I see where that happened, but what about the Pharisees and the stoning? Why didn't Jesus accommodate them by just letting them kill the woman?
Wow.
And I've never heard that question before, and I wonder what. That's a strange thing, to come up with. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought it was a brilliant question. But here's what happened. Rather than me, I was trying to go one way with it, and then the Lord just told me, slow down. Think about this. Think about this. Make sure I didn't accommodate. Okay. So I looked at the thing, and you know what became obvious to me? That he did accommodate them.
Mm.
He used their own understanding of the law. He who is without sin cast the first stone. He didn't sit there and say, listen, if you knew me, you would know I would never order anyone to be stoned. He could have said that, but he didn't. Instead, he used their own law to convict them of their own sin under their own standards. So that they dropped their rocks and they left. It was the perfect accommodation. And I told the guy was so happy. That's a great question.
It's a good lawyer answer.
That is good.
But I just think there's always a blessed answer for the moment. If we'll just be pensive with the Lord about it and factor into it, I think what they need to hear, but also factor into it, what is it that I need to go into new territory about, and to examine the question and to honor the question, to respect the question, but seeking to bless the asker instead of prove the asker wrong or, be irritated by it or something. I mean, it's just that there's a chance for us to be really noble about the thing and helpful and tender, and which you said earlier about coming in the tenderness of the Lord. And I know I've got this quote wrong from Shakespeare. I think I've got it backwards, but it was we talked about it before we started about being kindly to hear and gentle to speak and kindly to hear. Just that we have that. And I know with you guys as pastors. I'd like to hear how y'all handle this situation, because you have to consider other people who are connected to the people who are asking y'all questions is usually, to me, it's a one-on-one thing, and I don't have to really have, a broad context with it. But y'all have such a huge context. I'd love to hear how y'all handle it.
All right, Fred.
Well, let me, I have got to be different levels of answers or different maybe situations that determine different ways to answer. So for me, what a learning process, because in 2017, when I put this forward to our congregation, which turned the congregation upside down, and the questions were coming fast and furious, and they were from angry people. Man, I wish I could go back to that Fred, and that scared Fred, who was feeling like he didn't realize he just blew this thing up. And I was so defensive in my answers, feeling like I had to defend myself. So Fred got in the way, and a lot of those answers were, I have to defend myself. So they were more about protecting me than they were,
And not just you had a congregation you felt you almost had to protect too, right? For those who had ears to hear. So you had all these layers.
You have those layers. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So sometimes later on, after I got the firefight that was just, you're just in the middle of a storm and you're surviving and you're just answering some questions. Once I got through that, there were times I had to answer questions because the congregation was being pulled apart. It was creating division. And so I had to step in and defend certain positions and certain things that I had said that required it. Some of that was done, a lot of that was done online. Now, what happens now, so that took place, and I just wish I just wasn't spiritually prepared for that. And I wish I could go back and have the understanding, maybe a little bit of the understanding that I have now, and go back. And I think I could have at least handled some of that situation with what we told, with a tone and a tenderness and a gentleness that would have revealed Christ-likeness instead of this, I had to defend myself. Today, most of my questions come from in class group setting. So, I don't always have the time to give and take with a person. So a lot of times the questions just require, the answer as everybody's listening in. Let me just share this with you. I already told you guys about the guy that stood up in the middle of a service. Well, on a Wednesday night before, we had a large Wednesday night before COVID, a really large Wednesday night group. And we were talking about divine command theory, just, if God says it, is it okay? And this guy was just arguing with me every Wednesday night. So he came the one Wednesday night, and he stood up and he said, I'm not going to let you. Now he's saying this to me in front of the congregation. I'm not letting you say anything else. This is just not right. What you're sharing is not correct. And, here I am. And the people are just staring at me like, what are you going to do? There's over 100 some adults in here. Like, what are you going to do about it? And it just hit me. I said, well, you don't have the right to do this, the authority to do this. And let's just assume that I don't right now, that the authority rests with the body. And let's just vote on who the body would like to hear, you or me. and I said, right now, those of you that want to hear someone speak, raise your hand. Don't raise your hand. If you'd like for me to continue, raise your hand. They all raised their hand, and the guy sat down.
Wow.
Wow.
And,
nice.
It was, and I did it, and I know the Spirit of the Lord just, there are times when He just gives you a peace in the middle of that.
But credit to that person too. Like, seriously.
For sitting back down.
Yes.
Yes.
Because normally they stomp out angry, right? And embarrassed.
Oh, that's what I expected. I expected more, but then he just sat down, and I'm just like, wow, the Lord. Richard was saying how as you began to respond, there was just a check in your spirit to go another direction. And I just felt
That's what we got to
know,
learn.
oh
That's
boy, yes, because when you get, if you feel like you've been attacked in these questions, man, there's so many emotions going, and just that pause. Unfortunately, sometimes, Mike, I don't know, when you're in front of a group of people and they're asking questions, you're answering on the floor.
Yeah.
But you know what? Even when you do that, if you've done it a few times, you learn how to even pause before you answer.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
You mean experience?
Experience. Isn't that a great
Some
thing?
experience you don't want, but it's the only one that works.
I learned this reading Richard years ago, when Richard brought up the tone of a lot of times we can tell when the Lord's speaking to us, if it's from the Lord, by the tone of it. And man, have I seen and experienced how people respond when we respond with a spirit of kindness and gentleness that you just referenced.
Wow. Yeah, the snarky, snarky is the word. It's so easy to get snarky, especially when you think you're being disrespected or purposely misunderstood. Yeah. I've always, the people I respect the most, just on a natural level, are people who disagree with me, but yet state my position fairly. I think that, and I want to be that way to others. Although with Calvin, I got to tell you, with Calvin, it's where they merge, because you could say most any ridiculous thing, and it does state its position fairly. But he's the one that I struggle with, because I've got some good things to say about Calvin, but I think it's important for us to be able to grasp whoever's asking us the question. All right, let me in my own mind honor the question. So what you're saying is this. This is basically what your foundation of that question is. This is what's bothering you, and this is what what your preliminary solution is to it, and be fair about it, and get them to say yes. And I think that's a good way to tenderize them into then listening, to where you want to go with it, and where you feel led to go with it. I think that if you give canned answers, and that's really challenging for me, because I can give a canned answer, and I don't want to be that way, because I tell you both, I feel the Lord's, more than anything else I do, I feel the Lord's pleasure personally when I take time to give somebody a quality effort to minister some truth to where they're curious about. And I think it's, honestly, I just think it's the most important thing I do. And it is one-to-one. It's not, the writing is one thing, but these things with people, for them to contact you and ask you a question on Facebook, that's a step. That's a step for somebody to do that to a stranger in most cases. Now, some of your Facebook friends you're not strangers with, but others you are. And so I think, but I would say this. I think that when somebody comes with a question, and they ask something like, even in Fred's case, if somebody comes in there and starts talking about God's sovereignty, for instance, and say, well, God is sovereign, God's in control, type of thing, then one thing we can do is do something that's called implicational thinking. Okay, if what you say is true, just ask the Lord to quicken some implications of that to you, so you can when you're dialoguing with him, you can say, well, this is what troubles me about that. Like with the plague thing, for instance, if somebody's coming, I said, well, that's what chills me about that is that, okay, so we're going to say that God puts cancer on children. We're going to say that God strikes this malady with that person. Even though you're not saying that, and I know that's not what your heart is, that's the implication of believing that as a foundational truth, that God strikes, gives brain diseases to kids and does all these other things, and takes people, when they're 35-year-old, by sending plagues on those who displease him, which is no different than sending plagues on those who displeased him in Egypt. And, hopefully you come around to the point where you can you're representing God in gentleness and peace, and you can say, well, that opens the floodgate. That's a big legal term. It opens the floodgate. If you do this, it'll open the floodgate. Well, if you had the certain certain presumptions, they can open the floodgate to all these taunting accusations that you will have against the Lord. And you can dress them up and make them sound like they're noble and he's in control and the divine, Fred mentioned the divine command. That basically says that whatever God says goes. If God says I'm striking you with cancer and you disgust me and you're a worm, then it's okay. Him saying it makes it right. Well, we can think about some implications on that and think, well, if that's true, what does that say about the moral nature of God? He's excluded himself from any sort of morality and gentleness and virtue, and he is responsible for evil. Evil not only gets dumped in his lap, he embraces it. He takes it up in his arms and says, yes, if I command it, you're not to question it. But then where does the command come from? The command you're talking about comes from Old Testament passages, from a lesser covenant, from a covenant that's not without flaw. Hebrews says the whole reason for the new covenant is that the old covenant had flaws in it. So, I mean, there's always kind of broad strokes to get people back to at least maybe step back gently and just consider the implications. Because you know what? Some people ask us questions looking for God's goodness. Other people ask us questions looking to excuse his goodness, and both of them deserve an answer, and both of them can be blessed by an answer. But I think those are just some things I've noticed when we're talking about getting people. The person who's looking for God's goodness is going to be more willing to go where you might try to lead them into some new areas of thought, whereas the person who's looking to excuse God's goodness, is going to be a little bit more resistant. So you have to be a little more, well, this is why I don't believe that. And not be dogmatic, but and say, well, you're wrong here and you're wrong there, but this is why I don't believe that, and then just hit the big stuff, the implications of it. So anyway.
Yeah, listening and watching for that check inside. You call it check in spirit. I call it that little extra tingle, the glimmer, the whatever you want to call it, when the Holy Spirit is saying, hey, hang on, I'm working on something here. Don't wreck it. Like you were saying before, something about pat answers, and I had them. I still have some, but the pat answers are sometimes a revelation of our patience. And we run to a pat answer because we're impatient with people. But that also reveals another layer. And this is what's really embarrassing. We can, as leaders, become egotistical and filled with ourselves, or think of ourselves higher than we ought to. Think of ourselves as, well, I know this stuff. I haven't got time for this group of people. And there's an entitled, condescending tone that can come through. Here's the answer. I remember I was responding to questions even on other people's pages, and I'm correcting people, correcting this because a new thing I just learned, I'm going to correct them. And I quickly post a link to this teacher, and I put other teachers under the bus just by, here's a link to what they say. And the choir will back me up. Ooh, that became very unhelpful, because that was not the kindness of Jesus. It may have given answers to some people. I happen to throw my pathway to some of those answers onto somebody, and that's not the pathway that they're on. I wasn't sensitive to that. And it wasn't about being right, but I also wanted to defend, some buddies and leaders. And even at one point when I was first learning a lot of this stuff, my mentors and teacher, I spoke bluntly and used their phrases boldly, not realizing how harsh they sounded. And it wasn't my answer. It was the answer given to me, which is all I had at the time. And I'm sitting on their tail. Like I'm riding their tailcoat. I'm trusting everything I'm hearing. And of course, I can just check with so-and-so and get the right answer. Like, maybe it's better to, how can I say this carefully and honestly? Can we let people know at some point, or as we're having these meaningful conversations, we don't have all the answers. We're on the journey learning. Why don't you come join me on this journey? All I can do is show you where I've gone, how I've gotten here. And instead of trying to be right. Do you know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
No, go ahead, Fred.
Well, real quick, what is the goal of the answer? So So is
Build
the
my
goal?
platform. It's easy.
Yeah. Well, for me, a lot of times, early on, the goal of the answer was I had to prove I was right.
Yeah.
So
Because that's how people saw
now,
you.
yeah. So, but now, again, over the course of years of answering questions, and again, got a lot to learn with it, but uh, I I can give my answer the best I can do with all I know and understand and experience, and then I can leave the conclusion the person comes to with the Lord. I felt like I had to give answers, and I almost felt like I had to convince everybody. I have to convince
Yeah.
you. So I'm looking for the best argument and the best way, um, kind of apologetics for grace and for God's goodness.
Yeah.
And it's so much freer to say, I'm going to give you my answer. Here's where I'm at with the Lord, and then just
Yeah.
leave the results to Him.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, real quick, Martin Buber. We talked about Martin Buber before. He wrote the book "I Thou." That's one of the most important books ever written
Oh,
in the
you
20th
have
century.
not brought that up for a long time.
Yeah, but the whole concept of I thou is that you and I have a completely I thou connection versus I it. I it is where I objectify you and I treat you like a thing, and I'm giving you answers like you're a thing instead of subjectively interacting with you and being wholehearted with you. And Buber's great example where he said this that led him to this revelation was a young student who came to talk to him one day. He says, I gave him by the pat answers because I was writing a book and I needed to usher him out. Well, he did, and he found out the boy killed himself that night. And he vowed at that moment that he would never again not be completely present with people who were coming to him with questions. And from that was birthed I and Thou. And I and thou is beautiful. It's the realm of the connection. We are connected. When you and I are speaking, when you're asking me something or I'm answering you something, there's a connection. It's the realm of the between. That's where the magic happens. And I would challenge or encourage people to not be scared to just talk in the moment.
Mm.
Another Hasidic Jew who was close to Buber came up with this thing called speaking thinking. And it was a term that just came to mean just speak out of your gut, speak in the moment. Don't pre-deliberate what you're going to say. Just let it come out. You'll be surprised at the amazing things that'll come out of your own mouth. It will be like Moses. The water didn't part till he stepped on it. That's when the water parted. So we need to just speak. We need to just speak. And if we make a mistake, we make a mistake. And we'll listen to the Spirit and apologize for something we say or whatever, or correct it. But the more we exercise this thing and trust our ability to speak truth into the moment, but at the same time listening. That's why it's called, speaking thinking, speaking listening. That its motto is, it contrasts with that Greek thought, I think, therefore I am. What this says is, I respond, therefore I will be changed. That's its motto. It's not, I think, therefore I am. It's not self-centric. It's, I respond, therefore I will be changed. I'm looking to be changed. I'm looking to learn from the question.
Let's come back to this to start the next one, because I also want to get into how we've answered some questions that have been asked. So thanks for joining us for this episode. Let's continue it next week. Oh man, I hope you enjoyed that discussion. Part 2 is going to happen next week. It's real. I know a lot of friends and folks who have tons of questions, and I don't know is a good answer. I also trust that somebody bigger than me is guiding me on a path to a better perspective of who and what the love of God is. And so if you're getting dragged on this path, just let go and enjoy the ride. There will be speed bumps, but the speed bumps are sometimes there to slow us down instead of rushing through to get the answers. I'm a pro at rushing through to get answers. I remember, this is huge, about 24 years ago, as I'm just beginning this journey of grace, I started using my skills and abilities to reach out to people to get answers. I had a ton of questions. I was a pastor of a church. I had just become a senior pastor, and is my first senior pastor role. I needed to have answers. Some of the stuff didn't make sense. It did not fit with my traditional past. That, oh no, I need to have answers because I can't talk about it if I don't have answers. So I'm calling people and making appointments and traveling to visit preachers and ministry leaders to try and get some answers that I can feel comfortable with. But 6 months into it, I was getting frustrated, and it's like the Holy Spirit said, "So, how's it going, eh? How's your search coming along?" I think I'm frustrated, and it's like the Holy Spirit said, "Then stop trying. I don't need your help to give you a revelation, but you're trying so hard in your own self-effort to get all these answers. Let me just walk you through it in my time for you, because you're not ready for some of those answers. I don't like it much, but there's something really true and gentle about it." I went, okay. And I was shocked at how answers did come later, like within 2 months, some pretty big ticket items in my brain. I had a really deep, soulful answer that, for me at that time, and some of those answers have matured and changed since then. That's 24 years ago. Like, I don't have the same position on certain things then that I do now, and none of us should. None of us should. That's why it's hard to have church faith statements, because they're locked in. There's no room for change. It's like, wait a minute. Who said we have to have these? They're the shortcut answers. They really are. They do not tell the message. They do not tell the personality of the church family, the group you're gathering you're with. And if you don't agree with some of them, most places will say, well, then you can't serve here or be here. So I haven't got it figured out. But if you're on this journey of unlearning and discovering a better hope-filled perspective on the love of God, if you're renovating your faith, deconstruction, yeah, it has room, and you're still going to deconstruct some compartments as you go, but we're renovating, we're growing in our faith now. So in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be dealing with the topic of after deconstruction, what then? And I'm going to give you a sneak peek. You may not remember it, but in about 3 weeks, you're going to see the one. It's called After Deconstruction, What Now? And it's going to be Love Your Enemies. That's the first title. And that has caused a whole bunch of topics to come up. So I want to learn to live the life of Jesus. Let's move on from deconstruction topics, which we'll still hit them anyway, but we're not going to make it the focus. We want to focus on let's grow, let's go. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Somebody on YouTube, Joy, says, wonderful conversation. Love the vulnerability coming from the men, and I love Richard's painting behind it. Yeah, no kidding, eh? and Joy, let me tell you this. This stuff's not scripted. We're real in each of our conversations here. Sometimes there's 5 people on, sometimes 4, but this is real. We're not doing fake, and we want to stay relative to the moment. So thank you for noticing that, because not everybody does. That's it. Anyway, I've got to run because I have another appointment I have to go to, but I wanted to be with you live. It's a number of weeks I've just streamed it live and have not sat here with you. Just the January has been a little bit nuts. So anyway, if you're watching, comment and say where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your feedback and what you thought of this. And I think next week's will be really good as well. So until then, have a fantastic week, and we will catch you next week. You can also watch these recordings online afterwards. Don't forget to go to the GAN network, Grace Awakening Network. Links are below. That airs tonight live, the same program we're just watching now. Now it goes on to the Roku TV. It goes on to Amazon Fire Stick. Apple TV's coming soon. It's on a whole bunch of places. So it's also online on just the internet. So 24 hours of Grace teachers all day, all night. And so Still Growing Grace has a slot on there on Wednesday evenings, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right, until then, have a great week. Thanks again. Join me next time on Still Growing in Grace. Enjoy previous episodes by downloading our podcast at growingingrace.ca. If this show has been an encouragement to you, consider making a donation today. For our Canadian link, visit growingingrace.ca, and for our USA link, visit eschurch.com. Your donation will help us continue spreading really good news. Thank you again for tuning in to Still Growing in Grace.